He's got the furriest brain ever.
I have the furriest brain you ever saw. That sounds kind of creepy.
It does.
How you doing, huh? Tube head?
Mama's gonna kill you. You know that, right, you tube head?
Hey everyone, and welcome to The Inside, a podcast where we get into the extraordinary minds and experiences of everyday people. I'm Jay, and with me, as always, is Adam. Hey Adam, how's it going, eh?
Pretty good, man. I've been doing pretty well. I've just been down at my church a lot lately doing some volunteering, with this whole situation we're living in. You can't really do a lot of togetherness, so I'm doing some stuff like doing some multi-track recordings with some of our high school, middle school youth, and just packing boxes for people that are in shut-ins and stuff like that. Just super duper rewarding work. But what about you?
Yeah, well, because I have a house and I'm old, I've been doing some stuff around the house. When you own a house, everybody's like, buy a house. Well, that's great, except for you're like constantly doing stuff to improve it. So I was down at the hardware store, had some tools I had to buy. And I don't know if you ever noticed, but like some stuff comes wrapped in this like industrial strength plastic stuff, and it's like molded on there. There's like no place. Yeah, there's no place in the back that's like perforated to like open it up or anything like that. And so
I don't know why they put that shit on there, man. It's like just impossible to take off.
I mean, initially you try to like just pry it apart with your hands and you can't, you're like, okay, so then you get out different stuff to try to open it up, scissors, a knife, other stuff. And not only is the implement that you're trying to open it with really sharp, but the plastic itself can be very sharp if you're not careful. So anyway, while I was there, I bought some razor blades.
For that men's volleyball game you're in? To shave your legs?
No, man. No. That's for my utility knife to cut the plastic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so while I was cutting it, I actually like cut my hand a little bit. It's so dangerous.
Yeah, wait. Is it a regional thing?
What?
Why'd you call it a utility knife? Isn't it? I call it a box cutter.
For me, a box cutter is like this single unit thing where it has one blade in it, and it's like a slide thing. Where a utility knife, you open it up and the razor blade's there instead of like a regular knife blade has a razor blade.
That makes sense. Well, no matter what you call it, I think the box cutters could be like a really good band name.
Yeah, man. I think the box cutters would be a great name. And thanks for asking, about how my hand is.
Oh yeah, sorry I didn't ask. Not really sorry, everyone, but sorry. I just wasn't really sure what I could do to help, with the whole you're through my screen thing. But I'll just say a quick little prayer for you and hope your hand gets better.
Man, I always appreciate that.
Oh, I do everything I can to make sure you suffer as long as possible.
Well, that interestingly leads into the person we're going to talk to today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I think he could help me with the cut on my hand and with your really, really crappy attempt at prayer.
Well, I'm all up for it. You know what? How about this? Let's take a little break. I'm going to listen to some Van Halen Unchained.
Oh, hey, one break coming up. I love that song, man. Oh, David Lee Roth. People give him a hard time, but he was amazing. Well, if you're going to listen to Unchained by Van Halen, I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to go listen to Chain by Marvin Gaye on the break.
I'll see you in a minute.
Yeah, I'll see you later, man.
Hey, David, how are you doing, man?
I'm pretty good. I've missed you a lot, Adam. How's that supervised probation going?
About as good as I'm expecting it to go.
We're pulling for you, man. We really are.
Thank you.
We're glad you had time to come and chat with us for a little bit today, David.
Thanks for asking me.
Of course.
Well, we're just going to jump right in. You grew up right here in Western North Carolina in the mountains. Your family were dairy farmers and hard workers, and your mom ran a diner. And I was wondering what you remember about your mom working in a diner.
I am a little bit of an endangered species here. I'm a genuine Southern Appalachian person. Grew up in Haywood County. We did have a dairy farm. We milked cows, and then my dad also worked for a dairy where we sent the milk. My mom worked in Waynesville. She did run a small restaurant there. That's what she did really all her life. She just loved doing that because she loved people, and she loved that the job was interesting. So we loved it because she always brought leftover food home at night, and we could eat like pigs. While we're on pigs, we used to keep a couple of pigs, and each of us would get one, and then Pam and I would feed them. My little sister would feed them until it was time for them to become something besides pigs. And we'd get really close to them, because we patted them and called them by name. And so Dad would always tell us that the pigs went to live somewhere else, when they disappeared. And so after the pigs had gone to live somewhere else, a few weeks later, we got all this pork, and we were eating sausage one morning, and we were having the best time eating all this sausage. And my sister got this horrified look on her face. She was about 5, and she went, "Sparky, oh no," and just ran out of the room. So I ate her little part of Sparky that day. I don't think she's forgiven me, and it's been 60 years.
Well, on top of that stuff, I think when you're older, you drove a milk truck and delivered ice cream, and I was just wondering where you went to do that and what that was like, and if driving a big old truck full of liquid was dangerous.
Before I headed off to Brevard College, I worked for Pet Dairy, and then in the summer times I worked for Pet as well. And then over fall break and at Christmas and other times I would come and work to earn money. So early on, my dad put me to driving trucks. He was in charge of a bunch of trucks that delivered milk and ice cream, and that picked up the milk and brought it to the bottling plant. And early on, one of my first jobs really was to drive the tanker trucks. And that was kind of interesting because tanker trucks don't have baffles in those big tanks. Because if you do put baffles in there, it'll churn the milk into butter before you can do anything else with it. So
it becomes like a butter truck.
Yeah, it becomes a butter truck.
It's hard to get
clean it out.
Hard to get all that butter out of there.
You really don't want to do that. But so I drove the tanker truck and drove the ice cream delivery trucks and the milk delivery trucks, just whatever. When somebody didn't show up, that was my job, that day to go do whatever they were doing. And then in the summertime, I had the route that included Western Carolina University. So I delivered ice cream and milk for a while, directly across the street from the Cullowhee Methodist Church, and never even noticed it was there because I was in high school. It was a good job. It really was. It's kind of fun to be out and see all kinds of different things. And I'm pretty proud because I never ran over anything.
Well, but you weren't a milkman, like the guy who left the milk at the front of the door.
No, they have a terrible reputation. So I was never the milkman. I did not do that part.
Did you know the muffin man?
It's really kind of funny because you delivered to grocery stores and little stores all over the place, and we followed each other around. The bread guy and the beer guy and the meat guy and the ice cream guy. We just followed each other around all the time. The bread guys made way the most money. They really did, but they worked a lot harder than us. Their routes were longer and they had a lot more to deliver.
Well, that was kind of a joke, but that turned into like an actual interesting answer.
I'm sorry, I'm a Methodist preacher. I don't really get humor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty dry.
Yeah.
Well, sadly, there are only just a few dairy farms left in Western North Carolina. But I did hear, because you were an ice cream guy, that's how you met your wife. Is that right?
That is how I met my wife. Before we move on, I'm really, really, really sad that there are so few dairy farms here now. I'm just not sure that it's a good idea that milk is trucked often 1,800 miles before we like get it in our grocery store. I'm not sure that's a sustainable model for the future.
Yeah, and honestly, for a lot of food, right? I mean, it's not just milk.
I did meet Della at a 4-H camp in Waynesville. I was delivering ice cream out there, but I had worked there as a high school student and had friends there. And so I would go out, and when I delivered the ice cream, I'd just hang out with some of my friends for a few minutes before I left. And one day I noticed this blonde girl walking across the baseball field, and she was carrying this like 5-gallon bucket of blackberries, excuse me. And I went over and just asked her what she was going to do with the blackberries. And she said, I've picked them to make a pie for the camp. And she made this pie for like 200 people. Dang. And I came back later that night and I ate some of the pie, and it was like really, really good. So I tried to talk to her a little bit, and she didn't want a thing in this world to do with me. So I guess I can't blame her. So I waited over the winter, and when summer came the next year, she was still working at the 4-H camp. So I tried again, and then we got married just a few months after that. So everything worked out all right. So.
Well, I heard she's still not talking to you, though.
She talks to me on an as-needed basis. Yeah. Things like close the door, pick that up, things like that.
Well, David, what did you find useful about working on a farm? Like, how did all those people you were around on that farm, what examples did they set on what work was like and work ethic and stuff like that?
Okay. Maybe the most useful thing that I learned was I learned to be able to do repetitious things over and over and over again until you're done, which is kind of a hard skill for a young person to learn. But once you kind of get that, then you can accomplish things in other areas in your life that might escape you if you don't learn it early. But I always love to grow things. Della really is the farmer at our house, but I really enjoy putting seeds in the ground and pulling weeds, and I enjoy the science and the mystery of things growing. We love to eat out of our own garden. I love to know where food comes from, and that was really kind of the coolest thing. That, and you had space around you. I mean, we could run off into the woods and hide and play and be gone for hours, and as long as we got back by dark, nobody really cared that much. I don't know you can do that now. So having space around you was a lot of fun living on a farm.
Well, David, you just mentioned like growing up in the woods, and that sounds really amazing. Like you said, I don't know how much of that you can do these days, but just talking about this kind of stuff, does it bring up any funny, interesting childhood stories?
We'd read this little article about don't be afraid of snakes, that they're not harmful. And so my sister and I had found this little snake. I guess it was a garter snake or something. And we kind of like played with it in the yard. Actually, we tormented it in the yard. And my mom was inside, and I think she was canning beans that day. And we had left the door open because that was just something we did at our house. We left the door open all the time, and in the summer because it was hot. And that little snake actually like came in the house and went up under the stove. And we told Mom, I remember we told Mom that the snake had come in the house and was behind the stove, and she kind of like listened to us like you do to your children when they say stuff like that. And a little bit later, she went and opened the door to the cabinet beside the stove. And then that time the snake had actually gotten up into the cabinet and was like lying in a frying pan. He was just curled up in there. And when she saw him, she went like full blown psychotic crazy woman. She went outside, got an axe, and came back in and beat the poor little snake into like a million different pieces and busted up all the pans. And then she threw away all the pans that were in the cabinet and washed it with Clorox. And so we never told Mom before she died that we actually had carried the snake up onto the walk right outside the door because we just didn't think that would be good for us.
And that was just a garter snake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine if it'd been like an anaconda or something. I don't know. Should have probably burned the house down.
Leveled the place.
You mentioned earlier about being a Methodist pastor. So you're a pastor and a paramedic, and a lot of your sermon illustrations use paramedic stories and stuff. But I was just curious, like, how'd you decide to do both? Like, how'd you decide to be a pastor or to be a paramedic? And like, I don't know, it's unusual to have those two going on at the same time.
I always loved the stories in Scripture. I mean, even as a tiny little kid, like I had the Jedi master of Sunday school teachers. Her name was Ms. Louie Nolan. And she was just, there were 10-year-old boys in her class. And that's all. There were no girls and nobody any older, nobody any younger. And like we were the worst kids in the whole world. And she was just able to like keep us corralled up, and she taught us all these remarkable stories about things that Jesus did. And she explained salvation to us in the coolest way. She took us all to her house, and she had a box of peaches there, and she had us all like peel a peach or two, and then we like put them in a pot, and we got them really hot, and then we got them out, and we put them in the jars, and we put the top on the jars, and then so we canned peaches, these 10-year-old boys. And when we got done canning the peaches, she set a can in front of each of us, and she said, now this is what being saved is like. You're going to hear about being saved all your life, but you need to understand that it's like when Jesus turns you into something that's still you, but is more durable and will last a lot longer. And then she put a rotten peach in the middle of the table, and she said, if you leave a peach alone long enough, it turns into that rotten mess that you see right there. And it stunk real bad. I can still remember. Nothing smells worse than a rotten peach, really. And so she said, these peaches that are in this can are still peaches. They're exactly what you need. But we've just done a little stuff to them so that they'll last a lot longer and they'll be a lot better for people. And that just stuck with me forever, that Ms. Louie explained Jesus being in your heart, like working on you in that way. You know, all these years later, I still kind of remember it that way. So I was always interested in the Jesus stories. Then you get a little older and you need a job. So I went to college to learn how to be a teacher. And I found out right away that I don't have the attention span to be like a school teacher. People actually have to work to do that. And so while I was in college, one of my professors said, you know, like, I read the stuff that you've written for me, and you seem to be really interested in this. Have you thought about becoming a minister? And my brother was one already. So I went and talked to him, and he tried to talk me out of it. But he didn't. And so after that, I just pursued that sort of calling. After college, went to seminary at Duke, and because that's what you do. And then after that, I got out, and they sent me to a church, because being in the Methodist church is kind of like being in the army. Well, not really. They don't shoot at you much, but they tell you where to go. And so they gave me a church, and then you get to spend the next however many years you work figuring out how to do it.
Well, you mentioned what about being a paramedic? What about that portion of it? Like, how long do you do those two together at the same time?
I did the two together for about 20 years. A long time ago, probably when I was in my late 20s, I stopped at an accident, a car wreck, and there was a woman there who turns out wasn't badly injured. She just had some lacerations that made her bleed a lot. And so she looked worse than she was, but I really had no idea what to do. And so I looked at the community college to see if they had some kind of course for like first aid or something, and instead signed up for an emergency medical technician course. And so I eventually went to paramedic school, and not long after that went to work part-time, although it was kind of full-time, for Haywood Emergency Medical Services. And so for 17 years, I worked on an ambulance and served two churches in Haywood County together.
Well, was there ever a time like when you were running a church service up there giving a sermon, like you got called to an emergency?
No, because I didn't carry a radio or a pager or anything when I was doing church. There were other people to do that. Although on occasion, people at church would need help, and so occasionally we had to call 911. We actually had a person suffer a heart attack and go into cardiac arrest at church. So occasionally I had to like stop what I was doing and go do, take care of that business. And then if we could, we just went back to finish church.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, now that I got that cleaned up, back to the message.
I'm not sure that anybody remembered anything that happened that day. Yeah.
So the one thing I've noticed about you being a minister, in addition to all the other stuff a minister does, but if you're looking at like the Sunday minister person, I really think for you the Gospels where it's at. The four Gospels, except for maybe John is not as important to you, but so the three Gospels and John.
Okay, for the four people who listen to this eventually, Jay said that. I didn't say it. Now go ahead.
I'm just saying I've heard that on the street somewhere. But what's your angle on the Gospels? Like, why is that something that's so important for people to know about?
People really do spend a lot of time arguing over whether they are conservative Christians or liberal Christians or progressive or traditional or all of those things. And I really want to be able to identify as a red letter Christian. And by that, I mean, I try to do the things that Jesus says in the Gospels. If you have one of those Bibles with red letters, if you are from way out of town, a red letter Bible is one that has what they believe to be the actual words of Jesus printed in red. So like Jesus is talking at that moment. But I really love the stories that are in the Gospel, because Jesus really did change communities that he went into, and he changed the people that he crossed paths with, especially the people that wanted to be a part of what he was doing. When he chose those disciples to help him, I've always been amazed that he picked men and women and rich people and poor people, and he picked some criminals and a terrorist or two. And, I know he had his 12, but he had this entourage of people around him that he depended on. And he clearly loved them a lot and confided in them a lot as well. And I'm just amazed that he was so reckless in how he picked his friends. He liked Gentiles, even though he talked bad about them a little bit. He really enjoyed women. He thought they were a little braver than the men. He was always picking somebody who was a little bit off the edge. His disciple Bartholomew was in other extra biblical texts the crazy one. In fact, he was so crazy that Jesus had to like cast a few demons out of him, but he left him just a little bit of crazy so he'd still be interesting, you know. And Jesus seemed to really enjoy that the disciples were all so different and that they fussed and argued among themselves and had to get used to getting along with one another because they didn't understand one another. And boy, is that a good model for church, you know, just where you come to a place where people are different from you. I mean, if you only look for a place where people are exactly like you, I think you will probably die of boredom and you won't get a chance to grow at all much. And one of the cool things about Jesus for me is that I'm constantly being challenged to like be a better person, to do something different, to learn something new, to give somebody benefit of the doubt, to dare to listen to a child when they speak wisdom to me. So I just love the Jesus story. I've never met anybody that I believe, you know, I've never met anybody in real life or on paper, or in story that better represents the heart and mind of what I believe to be God than Jesus did. So yeah, I like the Gospels. I'm a terrible Paul's letter preacher and not a very good Old Testament preacher.
Well, David, earlier on you mentioned you were an endangered species of being a native Southern Appalachian guy, or Appalachia, sorry. But I heard you used to go visit all these like real old timer people out in the mountains and hollers and stuff like that back when you were pastor / paramedic. And how did visits to those kind of people differ from like other visits you went on?
Well, Southern Appalachian people really were, I don't know that they are so much now, but they really were different from Southern people and different from other people because of the isolation that they knew living in the mountains. This was isolation that they actually chose, and you'll have to take a college course to learn about that. We don't have time today. So they were different. They spoke differently. The language was different enough that sometimes it was hard to understand. But their understanding of what's good and what's necessary and what's important wasn't really different from any other people that I have known. I was often amazed at how they were able to like use things that other people would throw away, how they were able to eke a living out of a place that most of us would not. I am Southern Appalachian, but I got to live in one of the creek bottoms, which means you had a little tiny dab of flat land that you could grow stuff on. And other people lived further up, and they were the ones that had to work a lot harder. And it was always an interesting thing to me to be around them, because they really were able to do a lot with a lot less, and didn't seem to desire a lot of the wealth that many of us want all in our lives. I would have to say now that, you know, there are just so many people live here now that most of those people are gone, or they've been moved into trailer parks in the middle of town somewhere. Or, you know, I mean, the world has changed a lot, but they were interesting folks. They really were. They were not a bit afraid of snakes or spiders, and they didn't care if they had wasps in their house, you know. And so I learned a lot from them.
I think, you know, folks get a chance to go out to like in the Smoky Mountain National Park to Cades Cove or Cataloochee Valley and see some of the buildings that are still set up there, and the churches and the schoolhouses, and like how remote those are. Like you could get a good feel of what life was like, or even hiking in there in the park some up at Purchase Knob or other places where there's still some of the cabins from the 1800s. That's pretty cool. And in Horace Kepart's book, Our Southern Highlanders, he came and lived with folks right around 1900, right?
Well, I think Kepart's books were actually an unvarnished account of the lives of these people. He introduced America to a group of people that lived along the spine of the Appalachians, who had learned how to survive in a place that didn't really give you much. It was really pretty and the water was good, but past that, you had to work really hard to survive. And if you spend all your time just surviving, then, there's a good chance that you'll become sort of a pretty hard tribal individual. And those are the people he met. I thought he portrayed them. I thought he portrayed them very well. Of course, I'd have to say that because they're my relatives, my ancestors and whatever else. But just to give you an idea how tough they are, I remember responding on an EMS call one time. They sent us to this guy's house, and what they told us was what he had said. And somebody had come out and said, you need to go to so-and-so because he's cut himself on the foot with an axe, right? And so we assumed he's cut himself recently, of course. So we went down, my partner and I, and after we found the place and we got out, we went up on his porch and he was sitting there and he had his foot covered up with a towel, and it really looked awful. But when I pulled the towel back, it had stitches in it. The cut had stitches in it. And I got to looking a little bit closer, and it was stitched with like a thin monofilament fishing line. And I was like, what happened here? And he said, well, I cut my foot and then I sewed it back up, but it doesn't look right. And I said,
did it himself?
I said, when did you do that? And he said, well, it was Easter Sunday. And I got to doing the math, and it was like 3 weeks before this.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
But this guy had, I don't know how many stitches. I don't know how he did it.
Well, and if you read Kepart's book, you realize so if that guy grew up here and he maybe had learned that type of living from his family, because not too long before that, it's so remote and so rugged, it would take you forever to go 15 miles to go somewhere, right? So you just took care of everything yourself. And some of these other folks, I heard you baptized Popcorn Sutton. And if you don't mind talking about it, I just maybe tell who he is a little bit and why did that matter? Because I think that was a big deal.
I served a couple of churches in Maggie Valley. My friend Popcorn, I guess a lot of people know, was a famous moonshiner. He's got videos and books and other stuff. Popcorn was kind of famous in our community for being a moonshiner and for being a hard guy. Earlier in his life, for being a really dangerous guy. As he aged, though, like we do sometimes, he mellowed some, and he had good friends in my church. In fact, he had a lot of relatives in one of my churches, and he started showing up at church. And at first, he would just kind of stand outside by the door, and I always made sure the windows up so he could hear what was going on. And he'd sit out there and smoke. And eventually, Popcorn came and said, I think I want to be baptized. And I talked to him about it. And that sort of conversation is private and will be forever. But after we discussed it, he did say, yeah, I'll do this. And so one Sunday morning, he came in and I asked him the same questions you ask everyone before you baptize them. And he, I believe at that moment, had given more thought to those questions than most people do. And so after he answered the questions. I baptized him. And then he looked at me and he said, "You might want to do that one more time." And so I did it one more time. And the thing between popcorn and I, and is the thing that happens between all people. I think that popcorn probably had really bad experiences with a lot of people, and I'll have to just hope that those things work out the best they can. But popcorn, after we baptized him, was a very generous, very deliberate member of our church for the rest of the time that I was there.
Well, David, I got a Mad Lib style fill in the blank question for you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
The coolest thing about being a paramedic is blank.
There's two cool things about being a paramedic.
There's only one blank. There's only one blank.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Hey, this is my interview. The coolest thing about being a paramedic is almost every time you go, somebody's really, really glad to see you because they called you.
Mm-hmm.
But the other kind of cool thing is occasionally, most of the time you just like took people to the hospital, but occasionally you got to save somebody's life. That really does not happen very much. But then later on, you're like walking down the street or you're in a restaurant somewhere and you see that person. And there's just nothing like that. It's pretty cool to be a part of a collective effort to keep somebody on the planet a little longer.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time. You said the first part, everyone's glad to see you. I'm having a hard time picturing like you show up and someone's like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" All right, the
That happens all the time now. Yeah.
The second one is the coolest thing about being a pastor is blank.
I get to meet the best people, and I get to work with the best people, and I get to be involved in projects that I wouldn't get to be involved in all the time if I had some other job. And all of that sort of eventually results in, I am constantly amazed that Jesus really does change people. He certainly changes me every day. And I just love watching that. I have never grown tired of that.
Well, David, we're going to finish you out with a speed round here, okay? So we're going to ask you a question, and you just answer off the top of your head. You don't no time to think about it. All right, ready?
Yep.
Barbecue or burgers?
Oh, burgers.
Cataloochee Valley or Mount LeConte?
Cataloochee.
Sourdough bread or wheat bread?
Oh, sourdough.
Summer.
Cornbread, really.
Too bad. You're not getting it. Summer or winter?
Got to have them both.
All right, fresh corn or vine ripe tomato?
Dang. Yes, please.
You're terrible at this.
You suck.
Okay, Doc Watson or John Prine?
I'm sorry, Doc. John.
All right, hammer or chainsaw?
Chainsaw.
Yeah.
Nice.
we had fun putting those together because we knew you're going to struggle with some of those.
You know, like the rest of the world doesn't know who John Prine or Doc Watson is, right?
Well, we're going to put them in the show notes so people can look up who they are. Because
go look that up, Blogland.
I knew you were going to choose John Prine, and we will certainly reference him in the show notes so people can check out what a great storyteller he was.
Well, I want to thank you both for asking me to come talk to you. This hasn't been the horrible experience that I really feared it would be.
No, it's been fun having you on.
You're the first one to say that.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, David. We'll catch up with you soon, man.
You're welcome. Checks in the mail.
See you, David.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, Adam, I really loved where he learned the value of doing repetitive things on a job. I've had to work some blue-collar jobs and hard jobs, and I have learned a lot from those lessons. But also when he talked about growing his own food, and I'm realizing that these are things that I do also, but we have a really big garden, and there's something to be said about growing your own food. And we just had a meal the other night, and everything we ate was something that we grew, and it was really cool. And then I guess the last thing that I thought about was just his story about Popcorn Sutton. It really made a big impact on me. To me, it's a story about God's grace and about a church that considers every person somebody of value. And you don't get a lot of that in a lot of churches these days.
Yeah.
So I think church has a really bad name. But not when you're hanging out with David. How about you? What were you thinking about?
I just thought the fact that growing up on a farm, that was really cool, getting to run around in the woods, and play and all that kind of stuff. Although I know it was a ton of hard work as well. But I think it's just stuff like that growing up that prepares you for a lot of life's challenges ahead, and you get a kind of more humbling perspective on life, and to have a job where you get to do what I'm going to call the behind the scenes kind of life. So where your food comes from, where your gas comes from, where your water comes from, all stuff that we don't really think about, but makes our society run.
Yeah.
So you get to think about that, other industries to do that. It gives you a better perspective on life and the way it all works and stuff like that. And I don't know, those people deserve a lot of respect because often there are times they're underpaid, but without it, I don't think the rest of us would be able to do a lot of what we do today. So
yeah, I agree with you, man.
Well, he was an awesome guest to have on, wasn't he?
Yeah. Just really made me think about a lot of things in a different way. It was cool.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about it for today, right?
Yep. I think that's going to take care of one more episode.
Woo! Alrighty, well, that was The Inside. Again, special thanks to our guest today, David, and our consulting editor, Jay Rubel, and our producer, Dave. The show is written, recorded, edited, and co-produced by Jay and myself. Our title music, Crossroads, was written by Rock Sounds, and we'll have a link in the show description. Our title music was performed by Keith Richards. We'll have more episodes coming soon, so make sure to listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at The Inside Podcasters, or shoot us an email at theinsidepodcasters@gmail.com. Let the good times roll. Everything's a lie on this intro. And you just tell us how you're doing, and then we'll start the questions.
Don't tell us how you're really doing. Lie about it a little bit.
Yeah, today really sucks.